and you are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis and Norman Richmond, and we just heard from Johnny Guitar Watson, Houston, Texas-born gentleman who made his mark in Los Angeles, California, and he passed away. He joined the ancestors on stage in Japan. But that song, Asante Sana, was a song that he wrote after meeting Eduardo Montalban Jr., and he was inspired to write that particular song. And we're on the line with Dr. Gerald Horne, a regular on Diasporic Music and the author of too many books to even mention, and very, very busy man. And how are you doing today, Dr. Horne?
Hey, it's all good.
So I guess the first thing we wanted to deal with was Texas. I believe we touched briefly on Buffalo last week, but you are in Texas, and Texas has been, and I guess will continue to be, the Wild Wild West. But what is your reaction to what took place there?
Well, you're referring, of course, to Salvador Ramos, 18 years old, entering Robb Elementary School a few days ago with an assault weapon, massacring 19 children, most of whom were 10 years old, and 2 teachers. The spouse of one of the deceased teachers then was so distraught, had a heart attack, and he died. We are shocked, but not surprised, I'm afraid to say, by this carnage. It's the direct result of the hegemony politically of the right wing in the United States of America, which maintains that there has to be proliferation of weapons in case a government comes to power that they object to, in which case they'll shoot it out of office. Now, that's not an exaggeration. That's what they tell us. Then we know that this is based upon a very striking interpretation of the much vaunted 18th century U.S. Constitution and the Second Amendment, which, by the way, the U.S. Supreme Court within days will interpret the Second Amendment to weaken gun control in states like New York, where there has been an attempt to implement gun control. And we know that this Constitution and the Second Amendment was based upon the idea that the settlers, the European invaders across class lines, had to have weapons in order to take land from the Native Americans, the indigenous. There was a sacred duty to keep weapons out of the hands of Native Americans, and also to keep the enslaved Africans in line. And so you cannot separate this carnage from white supremacy, nor from this interpretation of the Constitution. I should also say that you can't separate it from U.S. foreign policy, which has been involved in mass murder overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and nations too numerous to mention. Inevitably, that cheapening of life returns to these shores with a vengeance. And so what's even perhaps more disturbing is that despite this carnage, there probably will be no new legislation. The Republicans, the right wing, have their heels dug in the sand. And I should also say that our friends on the left need to do some rethinking as well. I was on Press TV. I'm afraid to say there's this ritual whenever there's a mass murder in the United States, like Buffalo a week ago, Uvalde, Texas this week. Press TV of Iran calls me to appear. And I have to say it's getting a bit tiresome, but I usually go on. And I was on with a typical Euro-American leftist who downplays the Republican intransigence that I just outlined and blames the Democrats. Now, you know, I stand second to none in my criticism of the Democrats, but it seems to me that kind of approach is really a cover-up for white supremacy, reason, which I think our Euro-American leftist friends need to rethink. And speaking of rethinking, this slogan that came out of the Occupy movement, the 1% versus the 99%, well, that's what I would call class and economic essentialism and reductionism. Since the inception of settler colonialism, technically it might have been the 99% versus the 1%, but everybody knows in real life that it's more like the 1/3 versus the 2/3, with the 1/3 comprised heavily of those who resembled the settlers, who then once again created this constitution which inscribes minority rule. As you know, as Hillary Clinton could tell you, you could get more votes in a presidential election and still lose because of the Electoral College, which inscribes minority rule. We know that the U.S. Supreme Court is about to take away women's reproductive freedom. That is an institution of unelected politicians in black robes appointed for life. And in the U.S. Senate, we know that California has 40 million people. Wyoming has 2% of that total, but yet both get 2 members of the U.S. Senate, which means a vote in Wyoming is worth more than a vote in California, which not only inscribes minority rule, it inscribes conservative rule, the 1/3 versus the 2/3, just as in the 19th century, it allowed slave owners, a minority of the denizens of North America, to rule up until the Civil War. So this country has many difficult problems, as Uvalde suggests. And another difficult problem is a reluctance or refusal of our friends on the left to rethink this entire settler colonial project. Settler colonialism, of course, being a term that's generally absent from their limited vocabularies.
So I guess you would unite with Imam Jamil Al-Amin's quote that I have a bit of advice to the left. That advice, don't get left.
Well, I go a bit deeper than that, although I appreciate the aphorism, I appreciate the subtle humor, but it's rather deep. You feel like you're playing Russian roulette in this country, because if you go outside, you can get shot. If you stay in your home, there can be a no-knock raid and you can get shot. So it's reflective of a deeper crisis.
Yeah, Melinda, you have some questions?
Yeah, I don't know if we wanted to move on to Germany and Africa.
Well, Chancellor Scholz, the German Chancellor, visited Africa trying to rally support for NATO and Berlin's position on Ukraine. Instead, he was lectured in South Africa by President Ramaphosa of South Africa, who instructed him that he should engage in negotiations with Russia. And of course, after he returned to Berlin, he and President Macron did call Moscow. I think that even though those who are called the pro-war left have generally ignored the fact that Africa, particularly Southern Africa, is not on board with regard to sanctions against Russia. Somehow they ignore that. But I know on our menu today is to discuss a rather striking event of the past week that may be more important than the dearth of headlines it received or perhaps did not receive. I'm referring to the fact, A, that the US president in Northeast Asia suggested that the United States would confront China militarily if China seeks to claim by force the rebel province known as Taiwan, which China claims as its own, 65 miles, by the way, speaking of Taiwan, from a populated Japanese island. At the same time, and this is what did not receive sufficient attention, Mr. Biden's comment, of course, did receive attention, as he was communing in Northeast Asia, you had a joint military exercise of Russian and Chinese bombers flying overhead. Beijing and Moscow claim that this was pre-planned, that it was a coincidence, that it was taking place as Mr. Biden was issuing his threats. Others, including myself, are not so sure. I think that Beijing and Moscow were sending a signal, just as Mr. Biden sent a signal, that the confrontation with Russia is stage one, and now the confrontation with China is stage two. Now, some listeners who are readers may recall that I wrote a piece on the website of Black Agenda Report a few days after the Russian intervention in Ukraine, basically outlining this stage one, stage two scenario. I have to say that I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not an oracle, but I do follow U.S. imperialism, and I do know that U.S. imperialism does not intend to surrender global leadership to China and Russia without a fight. The problem is that many of us are passengers on this ship of fools in North America, and I say North America because collateral damage could easily include Canada as well. Keep that in mind. And that's part of the contradiction that I think many Black Americans are going to have to face. I don't know if they realize it yet, which is that to the extent that U.S. imperialism is an incipient decline, like a seesaw, that could lead to a rise of Africa. Now, you would think that many of our Black friends would salute the rise of Africa, although if you've been following the rhetoric about China's assistance to Africa, you might think otherwise, because oftentimes many of our Black friends in North America echo imperialist talking points. But the dilemma being that the rise of Africa might be accompanied by the decline of the place where they reside. Speaking of the United States of America, which already is suffering many signs of decline, including hyperinflation, price of gasoline at the pump headed towards $7. Some say it'll eventually settle at $10. Shortages of baby formula causing an emergency supply to be flown in from Germany, of all places. But once again, I think the part of the problem is if you're not really following what's going on, then generally everything becomes a surprise.
You're listening to Diasporic Music with Dr. Gerald Horne, Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond. I saw a very interesting webinar last night. I don't know if it was took place last night, but it was the UNIA Banneker, what do they call themselves? Woodson Banneker chapter after Benjamin Banneker and Carter G. Woodson. But they were actually talking about Papua New Guinea. They had a woman and a man on from Papua New Guinea, and I found the conversation very, very enlightening or endarkening. It was very, very good. I would recommend that to the listeners as well as yourself, Dr. Horne.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I think last week we talked about Keto Swan's book, on the Black Pacific.
Yes.
Which, of course, in terms of the news, in terms of our melanin-rich brethren and sisters in the South Seas, as it used to be called, Solomon Islands is in the news because they're about to ink a pact with China, bringing them closer to China, which is freaking out not only the United States, but Russia, but Australia. And it would not surprise me if they tried a regime change in Solomon Islands. So keep your eye peeled.
I have a question for you. Why would Chancellor, what do you call the head of state? Chancellor Scholz, why would he go to Niger and to Senegal? General Baker used to always tell me to just look at a mineral map. Is there a mineral besides the mineral? Is it only the minerals, or what is the reason why Niger, South Africa, and Senegal? Why is Germany interested in those spots?
Well, Niger, of course, has uranium that came up during the second Bush administration, you might recall.
Yes.
That was a big issue then. Senegal, there's prospecting for natural gas. And if the EU turns its back on Russian uranium and Russian natural gas, they're going to have to turn their attention to Africa, which is part of what I've been suggesting for the past few weeks. And then South Africa has gold, a la Russia. It has titanium, a la Russia, necessary for construction of advanced aircraft. Palladium, necessary for construction of catalytic converters, which are put on cars that you see in the streets of Toronto and are being stolen like crazy in the United States of America, because they can be sold for a pretty penny. So it's all explicable why Chancellor Scholz went to Africa. And of course, he's seeking diplomatic support as well, as aforementioned.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Dr. Gerald Horne, Melinda Francis, and Norman Richmond. You have some more questions, Melinda? Is Melinda on mute or?
Oh, I was on mute. So, yeah, maybe we should talk about the bombers, the Russian-Chinese bombers.
Well, I think I made reference to that, but it will allow me to reiterate the importance of these bombers over Northeast Asia as Biden was speaking, and also contemporaneously the speech given by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, which was kind of a clarion call for a new Cold War with China. That's what I mean about stage 1 and stage 2. Now, as we've said many times on this program, obviously U.S. policy towards China has backfired. When it was inaugurated 50 years ago, the idea was to turn China against the Soviet Union. Mr. Trump, 2016 to 2020, when he was snuggling up to Moscow, he was trying to do the reverse, to turn Russia against China. I don't think that would have worked, but that was his intention. The Democrats, it's oftentimes spoken about how Mr. Trump was not a sound steward of imperial interests. Well, from the point of view of imperialism, Mr. Trump's strategy makes more sense than Mr. Biden's strategy of confronting both simultaneously. Because that's a fool's errand. It's not going to work. It will end in tears. I don't think Mr. Trump's strategy would have worked, but it certainly made more sense.
Biden isn't he? He's not really playing with the full deck. When I say playing with the full deck, you've mentioned it before, but his memory, he's not really all there because of age. Don't you think that's a big factor in the way he's moving?
Well, that's often alleged. Certainly, that's alleged by his critics. I have not done a clinical examination of Mr. Biden, so I'm unable to comment authoritatively. On a program I was on a few days ago, I know, it was Roland Martin's program, The Culture, with Faraji Muhammad. You'll find it
on YouTube.
Show on my Facebook page, one of my Facebook pages. But in any case, I said that I thought that Mr. Biden, when he was threatening China earlier this week, was engaged in the crazy man strategy. That was the strategy of Richard Nixon in the early 70s during the war in Indochina, where he wanted the Vietnamese to think that he was crazy and that as a crazy man, he'd do anything. So they better negotiate. So I'm not sure if Mr. Biden is involved in cognitive decline, as they say euphemistically, but I have suggested that he might be channeling his inner Richard Nixon.
Could you talk about the summit of the Americas and what role, if any, does the Caribbean and Africans in America have in that organization?
Well, it's organized by the U.S. government in Los Angeles in June, a few days from now. It's a regular summit of hemispheric nations, including Canada, by the way. The controversy now is that Mexico will not send its head of state unless Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are invited, which is unlikely. There have been noises from the Caribbean community that they would act likewise, although obviously they do not have as much leverage as Mexico City in terms of confronting U.S. imperialism, so they may be forced to back down. In any case, it's another turning point with regard to U.S. imperialism, because as Washington is involved in Cold War strategies against left-leaning regimes, you have China moving in an opposing direction. And by the way, I should mention that as we speak, you have an important election taking place in Colombia on the northern coast of South America, which has one of the largest Black populations in this hemisphere. Interestingly enough, the left-wing candidate, Gustavo Petro, and his Black female vice president, Francia Marquez, are expected to prevail. But perhaps one of you could do a quick search online and see if any results are in yet.
Colombia, Colombia is they're after Brazil. Are they in terms of the Western Hemisphere? Is it Brazil is number one in terms of African people, and I guess the U.S. is 2 or 3. But Colombia is in the top 3, like you said, right?
Top 3 or 4.
Okay.
So I did a quick Google search. There's no. It just has. I just see the first thing is analysis on it, so the results are not in yet, I don't think.
Well, stay tuned.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Colombia, Dr. Horne?
I don't think so, but I do know that Colombia, during the days of slavery, particularly Cartagena, it was one of the hottest spots in the Americas with regard to slave rebelliousness. I talk about that in both my 16th and 17th century books.
Well, Comrade Walter Turner, I think Ajamu Baraka or have done what I think a Jamo Baraka. He might. He spends. I think he spends quite a bit of time in Colombia, but that's an area I guess we have been keeping an eye on, but I guess we should definitely keep a closer eye on. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. Because I wrote a friend this morning suggesting that it's a victory insofar as the two left-leaning candidates that I just mentioned have not been assassinated, because that's the way things usually go down in Colombia. They bump off progressives. As you know, Colombia has had a long history of insurgency, la violencia, the violence. In fact, it was an influence on a young Fidel Castro, who traveled there during the height of la violencia, the violence, and was deeply struck by what he witnessed. Of course, you've had these various insurgencies. The Cubans helped to negotiate what we thought was a peace pact, but the elections today will tell the tale of whether those pacts were worth the paper they were written on.
I guess we're coming to near the end, but what are your thoughts on the NBA finals?
Well, I have my money on Boston. And matter of fact, your friend Walter Turner will validate that weeks ago I predicted Boston would prevail. So they're playing the Miami Heat. We shall see if my prediction comes true.
Your man Jimmy Butler with his 47 points. You think he can prove you wrong?
Perhaps. Time will tell.
Where is Jimmy Butler? Is he a Texas? Was he a Texas guy?
I think so, but I think he went to school in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, that's the homeland of Howard Fuller, aka Owusu Sodoke, the man who started all this he started in 1972. He went to Mozambique, and I saw there's an interview with him and Ron Daniels on YouTube where Owusu talks about going to Guyana, and that's where he really became conscious. He said he was conscious, but I think he going to Guyana got him interested, I guess, in scientific socialism. It's a good interview between him and Ron Daniels. You can see it on YouTube.
Yeah, I get Ron's emails, so I'm familiar with that interview.
So, did you ever come across Owusu before?
Well, I've been following his career, and I think I probably write about him in my book on Southern Africa. Of course, his journey has been serpentine, as they say, as a public school educator, and then a sort of relationship of sorts with the Republicans in Wisconsin.
Yes. Right.
I don't know if he talks about that in the interview, because that led to a lot of criticism from the left.
Just criticism.
Sorry?
I say just criticism.
Yeah. Does he talk about that in the interview?
I haven't really listened to the whole interview, because he grew up and was born in Shreveport, and I spent quite a bit of time with him when he used to come to Toronto, and it really hurt me when he flip-flopped and started taking those right-wing positions, because he inspired a lot of us to go to scientific socialism away from a lot of my friends in Detroit, they used to always call me a cultural nationalist, not because of my ideology. They call me a cultural nationalist because I would walk around with the African clothes, and they always teased me about walking around. Told me to get a lunch pail because walking around with those African clothes in Detroit, that is, too many eyes would be on you. So, basically get your lunch pail and some khakis and melt in. But that Owusu was I was very disappointed when he did his Republican thing. Very disappointed.
I hear you.
Especially because he was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, just like Bunchy Carter, Johnny Cochran, and Masai Hewitt, and many. I guess John Henry Clark would say you had revolutionaries, working class heroes, buffoons, and idiots. Everybody, every city or every city you mentioned, they've all produced various types of people. No one has produced all good and all bad.
I hear you. Sometimes in the same